Thank you very much for coming. I know it's Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, and I'm really excited to be here to talk to you a little bit about academia and what to expect and maybe some tips for success. Women are largely underrepresented in academia, especially in the sciences. Back in 1978, I was about an 8th grader, about 10% of women made up the faculty at four-year universities and colleges. And today it's about 41% at master's level universities and 33% at doctoral level universities. So it's improved, but we're still largely represented. And let me see if I get my slides to work here. It's the wrong way. So the objective today, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how to find the right graduate school, or at least give you some suggestions for finding the right graduate school, what you can expect as a graduate student when you get there, some reasons why we're underrepresented, and some keys for success, promises and rewards, and some tips for success there at the end. Just to tell you a little bit about my story, I graduated from the University of Nebraska-Kearney in 1987. I know I don't look that old, but at that time, it was kind of the big corporate fitness boom, and I was an individual, I was an athlete in high school, and knew I didn't want a desk job, and so I kind of got into corporate fitness. And I did an internship at a YMCA and realized that probably wasn't the route I wanted to take, and didn't know exactly what to do with my degree at that time, and so convinced my parents that I needed to go to Las Vegas to the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, and use their job board and their interview for all of the jobs and graduate schools I thought I was qualified for. So I did. I interviewed, took my resume, and applied to a lot of graduate schools. And I ended up in Fresno, California. And I did a phone interview with Tim Anderson, who ended up being my mentor, but I went sight unseen and just kind of asked a few questions. And really, I didn't have a lot of guidance guidance as an undergraduate student about what to do and what to ask. And I think at that time, I was 21 years old and really more enamored with moving to California than I was going to graduate school, but got in the car and drove out. And first year was really tough. I was homesick, and the level of courses was much higher than it was as an undergraduate at Kearney. And so I stuck it out, though. And that's where I learned that I thought academia was maybe for me. I loved the autonomy that the job offered. I had a strong mentor. I loved to learn, and so I decided I would go on. And if you want to get a job at a tenure track or a tenure track position at a four-year university, you need a terminal degree. So I was back in Vegas for a Southwest ACSM regional meeting, and I'm walking around looking at posters, and I see Craig Caesar, who's at San Jose State University, and one of his co-authors was Terry Housh at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So I start talking to him a little bit about Nebraska, and because that's where I'm from. And he said, well, Terry Housh has an opening in his graduate program, so you should go check it out. So I made an appointment to go see Terry, so I actually went to a university and toured around a little bit and interviewed, and decided that I loved California at the time. I figured I could always go back. So I ended up in Lincoln and graduated in 1993 with a PhD in exercise physiology. So I am an individual who went straight through. I didn't take any breaks, went from undergrad to master's to PhD. And when I got done, I was 28 years old. And the average age is about 33, so I'm about 5 years ahead of the game. And took my first position at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti. If anybody from Michigan? Yes, so you got the hand and people pointing where you're from. And so I really enjoyed the job there, and living in Michigan. It's a beautiful state, but it was a really teaching intensive, and I like to do research. And so I started looking kind of right away. And I was there for 2 years and applied for a position at Creighton University, which is only 45 miles from my hometown, and ended up back there in 1995. And that's where I've been since 1995. And I lost the big hair finally, and I'm the 1/3 from your left up there. So that's our department right now. I was promoted to professor in 2007, and Creighton is a private Jesuit university, liberal arts, known for its health sciences programs. So it's not a PhD granting university. It's not a doctoral university. It's a master's level, although we do confer some PhDs. So the way everything worked out for me. I mean, things kind of fell into place for me, and it was kind of by fate or whatever. But it's not necessarily the right thing to do or the right way to do things. So I'm going to give you some advice, I guess, on what not to do. So finding the right program, timing is really important. If you think you're interested in going to graduate school, you probably want to wait till you're in the upper division courses, so you know what kind of field you're interested in, and start taking some time to find programs. There's lots of resources. Of course, going to regional meetings and national meetings like you are here, use the job board in the back. You probably networked quite a bit. That's really important. Anymore now, it's almost more important to find a strong mentor than it is to find a strong program. Or you want a strong program, obviously, but you may want to look for somebody to work with. But there are lots of tools to help you find graduate programs, online tools, and you want to do your homework, and you can find graduate bulletins online and explanations about programs. That's the great thing about the internet. Of course, networking at meetings like this and asking questions of the faculty in your department, other professionals. Don't be afraid. A lot of us are really happy to help people and mentor, so do not be afraid to ask people about that. Once you find a few campuses you think you might like, it would be important to schedule a visit, just to find out about the culture of the university, a little bit about the city that you're going to live in, just because you're going to be there for a few years. And then give yourself some time. Allow at least 6 months. And part of that might be, I had a colleague who was a CPA and loved to exercise and got into the business of public accounting and hated it. So he had to come back to school and get some prerequisites done to get into the graduate program that he wanted to be in. So giving yourself some extra time allows you to pick up a course or something that would get you into the graduate program of your choice. And conduct a broad search. It's nice to be close to home, but there's also something to be said about moving around and seeing different parts of the country or working with someone in a particular field. And so conduct a broad search. You might even consider looking overseas. There's lots of exciting graduate programs overseas that are 2-3 year programs. And make yourself an attractive candidate. So, volunteering, doing research, doing internships, getting certifications like a CSCS or a CPT would certainly make you an attractive candidate. And then most graduate schools require that you take the graduate record examination and score in the 50th percentile of the verbal and quantitative section. So you want to probably take the GRE. When you find a program, one good thing to do is to look to see if they have any assistantships, research assistantships, graduate assistantships that will help fund your graduate education. I was fortunate in that at Fresno, I was a research assistant as well as at UNL, and so my tuition was waived, and I got a small stipend for helping with research, teaching some classes, and so I really was able to come out of school debt-free. My parents took care of my undergraduate education, so do not be afraid to look for assistantships. And then one mistake I made as a master's level student is I didn't know what I was doing really as an undergrad, was I found this assistantship through the Department of Exercise Science at Fresno, so I applied there, got accepted as a research assistant, got to Fresno and forgot to matriculate to the university. So I get there, I show up, 1,500 miles away from home, and they have no idea who I am. So it all worked out. They got me taken care of. But that's how little I knew about what to do. I was like, oh, I got to apply to the school too. I figured everything was happening at the same time when I applied to the department. So, and I'm blonde, so that maybe explains some of it too. So if you decide, you find a program that you like, how long does it take? It depends on your situation. Some people are working, some people have families. I didn't. If you can go, right through a program and you have an assistantship or part-time job, you might be able to get done in about 2 years. And there are both thesis and non-thesis options. If you have any inkling at all about going on for your PhD, you definitely want to do the thesis option. And that's just a research paper essentially that demonstrates your critical thinking and analytical skills. You might actually do an experiment, or you'll just do a comprehensive review of literature. But you definitely want to do the thesis option. And then some people go on to work and get some real life experience after their master's. I didn't. I went straight through, and there's pros and cons to that. I was used to not having any money. You're living on like $5,000 a year or whatever it was. And so I remember when I got my first paycheck at Eastern Michigan University, it was like the most money I had ever seen. It's like, wow, I'm rich. And then I realized how much the government takes out. But anyway, if you decide you want to go on and get a terminal degree, the two common ones that we have in science are PhD. Well, PhD would probably be the most common, but you also have professors that may have an EDD, a Doctorate of Education. And it might take 3 to 4 years, again, depending on your situation and the mentor that you find to work with. And this involves a dissertation, which is very similar to a thesis, except it usually represents some original work that contributes something new to the field. And in addition to coursework and doing research, you also complete comprehensive written and oral examinations. And then you need to have this PhD or an EDD to acquire a tenure track position. What's the difference between a PhD and an EDD? A PhD is a Doctor of Philosophy, and it's a little bit misleading because, I mean, technically, I guess only philosophers would have a Doctor of Philosophy. But what it means is that you have got strong training in statistical analysis and research design and conducting experiments. So well prepared to conduct experimental research. Whereas an EDD, Doctorate of Education, they also complete comprehensive exams and do a dissertation, but it may be a more specialized degree in education. It's typically more focused in a professional practice. And then once you do a PhD, you can go on and do a postdoctoral fellowship, which is often a paid position, and you can get more training in a specific area of research, for example, or a technique. Those are 2 to 4 year programs. So a lot of people who have jobs in Research One institutions end up with a postdoc. When you get into a position, you get into a 4-year teaching university, master's or doctoral level, there's 3 primary responsibilities that we have as an academic: teaching, research, and service. And the time that you devote to each of those areas just depends on your institution and what they value most. Master's level universities like Creighton University expect excellence in all 3 areas. Be excellent teaching, research, service. People who don't get tenure, it's usually because they don't have enough scholarship, enough research. At places like Creighton, however, where teaching is really emphasized, if you're a poor teacher, it may also mean you may not get tenure. Doctoral granting universities, they offer a wide range of undergraduate programs. The focus is really on graduate education and getting grant money. So there's a little bit of some differences in the tenure and promotion process. So if you end up at a master's level university like me, I'm at Creighton, teaching loads are typically 3 to 4 course loads. When I was at Eastern Michigan, I was teaching like 4 classes and trying to conduct research, and I was working 100 hours a week, and that was part of the reason I left. At Creighton University, I'm fortunate, they go by contact hours. So I have 9 contact hours per week with my students. I teach anatomy with 2 labs, and that counts for 6 hours. And I teach 1 3-hour lecture class. So I have a kind of a 2-2 sort of load, 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring. And it's a nice balance for me. But at most universities, you can expect to teach 3 to 4 classes. Publications are expected, but not probably the number that would be expected at a doctoral granting university. So maybe 1 or 2 a year. Grants would be great if you get it, but not necessarily required for tenure. And with doctoral granting universities, because the emphasis is on research, scholarship, grantsmanship, the course load that you teach is a lot lower. So maybe only 1 to 2 a semester, or maybe 0 when you first come in and they get you started. So teaching expectations are lower. However, you have a much higher emphasis for procuring grants to help pay for your graduate students, to help keep your lab up. So there's a little bit more pressure to do that. And you probably hear faculty members talk about tenure and it's such a big deal, and it's a very critical period in your life, and it's a pretty stressful period of life. And it's because it's basically a lifetime job contract. And so the university is making an agreement with you. They're going to keep you here for forever, essentially, unless you do something really, really bad to screw it up. And typically it's applied for after a probationary period of 6 to 7 years. So some people have a mid-tenure review at about 3 years to say, here's where you're doing great. Here's where you need to, pick things up a little bit to help make sure that you're successful. So at 6 or 7 years, depending on when you go up, you're usually going up for both tenure and promotion. And in a lot of places, they come together. In some places, at Creighton, for example, you can get tenure without promotion, and that's usually because the research is a little scant, and then you've got time then to reapply later for promotion. But that's not the case at all universities. So you're promoted to associate professor, and if you fail to achieve tenure, you're usually given at least 1 more year to beef up the dossier and reapply. But if you fail to reach tenure after that time, you're essentially fired, you're terminated. And so you got to look for a different job. And then after associate professor, the highest rank of position at most universities is professor. And then when you retire, professor emeritus. So this cartoon just kind of shows people's life, your life during your first, it looks like kind of force velocity curve up there, but the walking speed you can see until tenure, the dashed line is tenure, so you've got this professor on the left who's scurrying everywhere and running around and doing everything and saying yes to everybody to get tenure and promotion. And then once you have that, you know, the joke is people kind of slow down and take things easy so that by the time you retire, you've got a big long beard and you're just kind of walking down the halls looking for something to do. The number of women who earn a PhD is about half, 50% of women earn PhDs in the United States. However, it's still, we're still underrepresented in the sciences. This is from the National Science Foundation. I just found it online. Represents the number of male and female in certain subdisciplines of science. You can see at the top there, about 626,000 doctorates of total science, and of that, about 75% are male and about 25% were female PhDs. You look down the line and you can see the difference between bioscience and biochemistry and cell biology. It's pretty close. Males 12,400 and females at 10,000. With physics, I thought the physics thing was pretty interesting, but with physics, about 43,000 graduates and only 4,400 are women, so physics is really underrepresented. As far as women as a percentage of faculty, it's at community colleges with a master's degree. We should probably backtrack a little bit. If you have a master's degree, you can usually teach at a community college, or you could be hired as an adjunct at a four-year university. You probably wouldn't be on a tenure track, but you could be full-time and make a decent salary, and you just probably have a year-to-year contract or maybe a 3-year contract. And so women make up a large percentage of the faculty at community colleges. As I mentioned earlier, about 41% at master's level universities. Baccalaureate would mean undergraduate level universities. And then only 33% at doctoral granting universities. And then you can see non-tenure positions, women make up a fair share of instructors, lecturers, and unranked positions. So why are women underrepresented in academia? You can probably figure it out for yourself. One thing, and I don't know that people understand this, is the expectations that are required of you from a time commitment. It's not a 40-hour-a-week job. You do have autonomy. You can go and do what you want, go get a haircut, go get a workout in, whatever you need to do. But to get everything done, it requires more than 40 hours. It's not uncommon to work 50, 60 hours. As I mentioned to you, when I got to Eastern Michigan, I was given, it probably wasn't a 4-course load, it was on a 3-course load, doing research and just trying to keep up with my preps and get some studies started. And we started a graduate program while I was there. I took Sundays off, that was it. Otherwise, I was working 12 to 14 hours a day. Pretty much that first 6 months I was there, I lost about, 30 pounds. I've obviously gained it back. But lost a lot of weight because I'd forget to eat and I'll just wait to eat till dinner. So I was working my tail off, and that's part of the reason that I decided I needed to find a job with better balance for me. But it's certainly not a 40-hour per week position. And summers, that was one of the things that attracted me too. It's okay, it's a 9-month job, so that means summers I have off. It's a little bit, I can travel, I can do stuff. And what you really find out is it's really not a 9-month position. It's really a 12-month position. They pay you for 9, but you end up working for at least 11 usually. It's lighter. It's much lighter. I teach a summer class, but it's when I'm coming to conferences or working on research and things like that. So you're usually working all year long. And it's difficult. If you look at that schedule, that'd be difficult for a married woman, especially a married woman with children. So if you want to be successful in academia, if you want to get promoted and move on to professor, does that mean you cannot get married and cannot have children? Of course it doesn't, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to come without sacrifice. And it may mean that you're having fewer children than you initially thought you would. When you're growing up and I'm going to have 5 kids, and now maybe it's 2 because I've only got time for 2. Or you've only got money for 2, you figure out. And there will be times you miss out. I was on a flight not too long ago with a woman. She was sitting next to me, and I could tell she was reviewing NIH grants. And so we struck up a conversation as I was getting ready for this talk and just asked her experience. And she was a neuroscientist at UNMC, University of Nebraska Medical Center, and was on her way to Washington for this NIH meeting, go over grants. And she had originally, her first job was at Brown University, and had kids and didn't get tenure. And so she was terminated and started looking for positions, and now her kids are like in their 20s and her career has flourished. A colleague of mine was just telling me a little bit earlier about a woman who kind of left her PhD program to raise her family and then went back 20 years later and defended her dissertation back in the UK, and then her career, kind of ignited probably when she was in her late 40s. So it's also very important that you have a supportive spouse. I'm not married, and so I can do whatever I want, which is really nice. But I have talked to colleagues who are married, young women, for example. I don't know if Abby Smith Ryan, some of you probably are familiar with here, and she's married to Eric, and he's a great guy. And she says, it's not like he isn't willing to pick things up or put a load of laundry in, but he doesn't think to do that. So she just has to make sure she asks for that kind of help. I have other colleagues that. Tammy Avidovich, a good friend of mine, a colleague, is now dean at Wayne State University, Nebraska. When they had their young kids, she had a baby, and 2 weeks later was back at work. Didn't want to take the probationary period, the maternity leave, because of the whole tenure thing and the perception that she wasn't, couldn't do what she was supposed to do. And her husband, Mark, then stopped working and raised their child. So they've got a couple of kids, and now Mark's going back to school, and Tammy's moved up to the ranks and is full professor and now a dean. So having a supportive spouse is really important. And like Eric and Abby Smith, and most of you know, they met during graduate school and ended up getting married, and that's pretty typical too. And you may have faculty at your university or college that are married, and you're stuck together during graduate school and kind of like each other, and you end up together. So other reasons why women are underrepresented: isolation, marginalization, some subtle biases. If you want to move up the ladder, if you're not happy in a position, but you've got family constraints, your kids are in school, then you're kind of stuck, then that can also impair your ability to move up. So subtle biases, I'll give you an example. A colleague of mine, it's Tammy. I don't think she'd mind if I told she's gone. So sitting in a meeting with a bunch of other deans or associate deans, and I don't know the topic they were discussing, but she had some idea and she mentioned it, and it was kind of glossed over. And then 2 weeks later, when they had the same meeting, some male dean said the same exact thing, and it was like the greatest idea since sliced bread. So, and her dean actually, or her dean or her provost actually said, yeah, we didn't listen to you. So it happens a little bit. But those might be reasons that females will leave academia to pursue other careers. Reasons for dropping out of graduate school can include a hostile work environment, sexual harassment, poor mentoring. I never had any of those situations. I never really saw it occurring in the programs I was at, but I have had undergraduates that have gone on, and not just females, but males who've been harassed, not sexually harassed, but just bullied, and ended up dropping out because they just couldn't work with their mentor. And that, again, is why it's so important to talk to people about mentors and who's a strong mentor and can really help guide you versus somebody who's not dedicated to their graduate students and really doesn't help them along. And unfortunately, sometimes you don't find that out until you're in the program, and then either you stick it out or you leave. So 2 of my mentors, and the other thing is, because women are underrepresented in academia, there's not a lot of female mentors. Strong female mentors. And so that was the case for me. Tim Anderson was my mentor at Fresno State University, and he was excellent. And that is, again, the reason I decided to go in academia. Tim Anderson was a large part of that. He was an excellent teacher. I loved his lifestyle outside of class, and I just thought, this would be a pretty good gig. So that's why I ended up going to Lincoln. And then Terry Housh at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, also very strong mentor for me, and treated both his male and female doctoral students the same, and he's hard on all of us. But really good, training us what to expect. Had a lot of publications coming out, which made us all very marketable. So really grateful to both Tim Anderson and Terry Housh for their mentoring. And again, it's really critical to have a strong mentor. So some keys for success. The other thing to think about is that there's differences between men and women and how we're socialized a little bit, and just probably some innate traits as well. Men are taught to be competitive at an early age, self-confident, assertive, whereas women are usually encouraged to be nurturers or help givers, or that's just naturally how we are. Maybe more modest in nature. An example might be, there's very few women full professors, and sometimes it's not that their dossier isn't strong enough, it's that they don't think it is. So if you had a guy and a woman and a male who both had an equal dossier or vita, the guy would probably think, they'd be an idiot not to promote me, whereas the woman might be like, well, I don't know, I should probably get a little more grant money or write something up. And so there's those kinds of things too. And then women also tend to internalize criticism a little bit more and hang on to it, probably not only professionally, but personally as well. But and guys are more easy to just like let things go. So they're yelling at each other and they're fighting, and then it's like the next day they're having a beer together, whereas women will hold that for a long period of time. So it's really important that you just kind of let stuff go, and just because somebody gives you a negative comment or doesn't agree with something doesn't mean that you're an idiot or you're not worthy or whatever. This is kind of a funny story. When I was in graduate school, Terry Housh actually received a review from a reviewer of a paper, and it said, "This is an affront to the scientific community." And those guys laughed it off, and they still bring that up when we're out drinking. It's like, oh, remember that paper? And they thought it was hilarious, submitted the paper somewhere else and got it published. Whereas a female would be like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible, that was a terrible paper, and internalize it. So we have a lot to learn from guys sometimes. And then there's also differences in men and women in how they define success. Women, maybe their family is more important, watching their kids grow up, whereas guys are kind of more work-oriented or having the prestige. In academia, prestige and power come with publications and with grant money. And so that sometimes might be important to a male versus a female. I have male colleagues that have goals of like, I'm going to have 50 publications by the time I'm 40. I never thought anything like that. That never ever came into my head that I'm going to have this many pubs, this many grants, this many what. So there's just differences between men and women in that way. So you might be listening to this talk, all the time, and you got to work hours. It's hard to be married and have the kids you want. You're thinking, well, why in the heck would anybody get into this, for crying out loud? When I was writing this paper, I'm like, wow, maybe I should have done something different, because I'm not sure. I'm unmarried and I have no children. I don't know if it was by circumstance or by choice. Probably a little bit of both, because there were times where I had relationships and I left those to pursue like my PhD, and those were the choices that I made. But there are some promises, there are some rewards, and one of those is that you do serve as a role model. Teaching, in not only high school, college, wherever, goes largely, it's unthanked. But all of you probably sitting in this room can think of a teacher or two that really influenced you and is very important to you. And so sometimes it's not until years later that you made a difference in somebody's life. You get a note from a student. I have a whole file of notes that I keep from students, so on days when I think I want to quit and do something else, I get that file out and I read these letters from the students, and I know that I've made a difference in their life. So for me, that's important, to serve as a role model. Also, it's not just a paycheck. I don't just do this to get a paycheck to pay the bills. It really is a vocation, and I enjoy it a lot, and I enjoy the autonomy that it has. I also enjoy the variety that the job offers. I teach anatomy, and anatomy doesn't change very much, which makes for an easy prep. But if I want to teach something different, I can, and I do, and I teach a nutrition class as well, sports nutrition. That's constantly changing. So I'm always learning, and I love that about my job. So it offers a lot of variety. And you are a lifelong learner. You also meet a lot of great people along the way. These are some pictures of me with Jeff Stout there, a pretty well-known guy. NSCA a lot, was a colleague of mine. He actually took a job at Creighton at the same time I did. He was 2 years behind me in the program at UNL. So we got to work together for a few years, and we were really prolific with publications because we could start with our feet running. Joe Weir in the middle. You can see Joe Weir, he's holding a little baby girl, and then that's Donna Housh, that's Terry's wife. They both had their first children while they were in graduate school. So that's us, I think, right after we'd gone through graduation at UNL. And some other more recent pictures. But I've made a lot of great friends along the way, and so that's been real important to me as well. Finally, just some tips for success. Love what you do, and if you're not happy in a position, don't be afraid to move. And sometimes you can't because you've got constraints, but it's one of the reasons I left Eastern Michigan. I was miserable. And so, and no offense to Eastern Michigan if there's any Eastern Michigan people here, but at that time, I was just working my tail off, and I needed to do something different. It wasn't good for my health. I lost so much weight, I had pneumonia, it was good, it was bad. Find good mentors. If you're not happy with the mentor you have now, or you can't find anybody in your department, look other places. Look in other departments. Take risks, like taking a job somewhere, or going somewhere and giving a presentation, something you're scared to do. It is really important that you try to have some balance in your life. Sometimes you're going to have more time for play, and sometimes you're going to have to take more time for work. But it really is important just for your whole mental well-being to find some balance. Learn to say no. It's hard to do when you are going up for tenure in those first 7 years, and there's also some suggestion that untenured faculty or junior faculty maybe get taken advantage of a little bit because they're afraid to say no. But you only have so much time, and so you need to weigh out what you really like to do, and what's going to be the most important. What's going to be the most important activities that will get you tenure and promotion. Stay current. I guess I skipped one there. Don't internalize criticism. Let it go. So if you're somebody who does kind of hold things in, if you can start to learn to let things go and not take it personally. Use constructive criticism. Stay current in your work. Attend meetings. Read journal articles. Take advantages of policies that do extend your probationary period for tenure. So I gave you an example of a female colleague of mine who did not do that because she was afraid that she might be considered weak or not pulling her weight. But really, go ahead and take advantage of it. That's why those policies are there. And so they might extend your tenure probation period by up to a year. And if you have more than one kid, maybe it's up to 2 years. Because that's one of the problems is that you're 33 years old when you get out of your PhD program, and maybe even older. That's the prime time when you're getting tenure. It's also the prime time to have kids. So the whole biological and tenure clocks are not synchronized very well. And the academic model is pretty much a male model, the whole tenure model, the male model that goes back to the 19th century, and it hasn't really changed very much. So there's some argument that maybe some policies need to change to allow people to have a family and still get tenure and be promoted. Also, don't worry what other people think of you. I think I was guilty of that when I first got out. A lot of people influence you, your mentors, whoever, but you really got to be true to yourself. And for me, like I said, I have colleagues that have to have so many pubs, 100 pubs, 150 pubs, and I'm the kind of gal I have some faith in my life. I don't think when I die and I go to heaven, I'm going to be asked, how many pubs did you have and how much money did you make as a tenured professor at Creighton University. So you have to get tenure. It's kind of a catch-22. But if you really love to work on a certain committee and it takes time away from research, then do it if you're tenured. Right? And don't just subscribe to what other people's definition of success is. So like I said earlier, if you really want to have prestige and power in this discipline, then publications and grants will get you known. But if you don't like to do that stuff, then you'd probably be better off looking for a university where you're teaching more and doing less research. So you just have to know what makes you happy and not what other people think you should be doing to be happy.